Think about the very first thing you did this morning. Your phone screamed at you. You blindly smashed your hand into the screen, desperately demanding exactly 9 more minutes of unconsciousness. Later, you stared at the microwave countdown, watching it hit 001, pulling the door open a fraction of a second early because you literally could not wait for the beep. We are completely, helplessly obsessed. We track every single minute. We panic over a 5-minute delay on our commute. If you log into a Zoom meeting 3 minutes late, you apologize profusely. If you show up to a party 10 minutes early, you sit in your car scrolling your phone so you don't look weird. We live inside an invisible, relentless cage of numbers. We call it time.
But look at a crow on a telephone wire. Look at a deer in the woods. Look at your dog sleeping on the rug. They do not care. A deer does not know it is Tuesday. A dog does not understand that it is 5 p.m. They understand light, they understand dark, they understand hunger, they understand the temperature dropping. That is the entire extent of their schedule. To the rest of the animal kingdom, time does not exist as a measurable grid. It is just a state of being.
So, how did we get here? How did a naked, shivering, deeply vulnerable bipedal ape on the ancient savanna suddenly decide to invent a concept that does not physically exist? Why did we start counting something you cannot touch, cannot eat, cannot hunt, and cannot hide from? Before the gears, before the pendulums, before the digital screens, how did your ancient ancestors know what time it was? And more importantly, why were they the only creatures on Earth who felt the desperate burning need to track it? Let's go. Imagine the ancient world. It was completely silent. There were no alarms, there were no dials, there were no screens. The forest was indifferent, the sky offered nothing, but the seasons moved. Winter was a killer. Cold meant absolute starvation. You had to prepare, you had to know. If you guessed wrong, your entire family died. If you missed migration, you ate frozen dirt. Instinct was not enough. Memory was not enough. They needed a system. They needed an anchor. They started watching shadows. They tracked the moon. They counted the days. They carved the bones. They built the monuments. They trapped the sun. They invented the future. Here is a fact that will completely shatter your perception of ancient intelligence. Long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, and tens of thousands of years before the invention of the wheel, humans were building physical hard drives to store time. Let's travel to the Lubombo Mountains, tucked between South Africa and Swaziland. In the 1970s, archaeologists excavating a small cave made a discovery that quietly rewrote the history of human cognition. They found a small, broken piece of a baboon's fibula. It is known today as the Lubombo bone, and it is roughly 35,000 years old. At first glance, it looks like a crude weapon or a simple scraping tool. But when you look closer under a microscope, you see the truth. The bone features 29 distinct, deliberately carved notches. They are not random scratches from butchering meat. They are uniformly spaced, intentionally cut, and clearly designed to be read. Why 29? Because 29.5 days is the exact length of a lunar phase, the time it takes for the moon to go from a thin silver crescent to a glowing full orb and back to dark. The person who held this bone 35,000 years ago was not just looking at the sky, they were recording it. They were tracking the passage of time. But here is the cocktail party fact that you will immediately want to text someone. The number 29 does not just perfectly align with the moon, it perfectly aligns with the human female menstrual cycle. Many modern evolutionary anthropologists now strongly believe that the very first mathematicians, the very first timekeepers in human history, were not male hunters tracking animal herds, they were women. Ancient women carving notches into a baboon bone to track their own biology, syncing the cycles of their own bodies with a massive glowing rock in the night sky. The first calendar wasn't agricultural, it was biological. It was deeply, intimately personal. But tracking a single month is relatively easy. You just count the days. The real terrifying problem for ancient humans was tracking the year, because if you lose track of the year, you die. A lunar year, 12 cycles of the moon, is roughly 354 days long. A solar year, the actual time it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun and cycle through the seasons, is roughly 365 days long. That 11-day gap is a massive, life-threatening glitch in the matrix. If an ancient tribe exclusively followed the moon to plan their migrations or gather seasonal plants, that 11-day gap would accumulate year after year. Within a single decade, their calendar would be off by over 100 days. They would expect spring, and they would be met with a blizzard. They would arrive at a river to catch the annual salmon run, and the fish would have passed through 2 months earlier. Ancient humans realized this. They recognized the cosmic mathematical error between the sun and the moon, and they decided to fix it. To see how they did it, we have to travel to a muddy field in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, a site known as Warren Field. In 2004, aerial photography revealed a strange series of massive pits dug into the earth. When archaeologists excavated them, they discovered a monumental alignment of 12 giant holes stretching over 50 meters long. They date back to 8000 BC. That is roughly 5,000 years before the first stones were ever dragged to Stonehenge. The people who built Warren Field were hunter-gatherers. They didn't have agriculture. They didn't have cities. They lived in tents made of animal hides. Yet, they engineered a massive, landscape-level astronomical calculator. The 12 pits represent the phases of the moon. But the entire monument is perfectly aligned with a specific notch in the distant mountains where the sun rises on the exact day of the midwinter solstice. Think about the sheer cognitive genius of this. These hunter-gatherers knew that the moon was lying to them. They knew the lunar calendar drifted, so they built a monument that acted as a reset button. Every single year, on the shortest, darkest, most brutal day of the Scottish winter, the sun would rise and align perfectly with their monument. At that exact moment, they knew the solar year had restarted. They recalibrated their lunar counts. They fixed the 11-day glitch. They didn't have telescopes. They didn't have written math. They just had the Earth, the sky, and an absolute, unshakable obsession with not starving to death. They built a clock out of the planet itself. As humans transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled farmers, the obsession with time escalated into an arms race. If you are a hunter, knowing the season is important. If you are a farmer, knowing the exact week to plant your wheat is the literal difference between a thriving village and a mass grave. Agriculture demanded absolute, unforgiving precision. And so the clocks became more advanced. Across the ocean, in the high deserts of New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloan people built something that still baffles modern engineers. At Chaco Canyon, perched high on a sheer cliff face at Fajada Butte, there is a site known as the Sun Dagger. Around 1,000 years ago, ancient Americans carved 2 spiral petroglyphs into the rock face. Then, they carefully positioned 3 massive, multi-ton stone slabs perfectly in front of the spirals. For most of the year, the stones just cast normal shadows. But on the exact day of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, a single, brilliant dagger of sunlight pierces perfectly through the gap in the stones and perfectly slices the center of the large spiral in half. On the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light perfectly frame the edges of the spiral. They didn't just track time, they forced the sun to dance for them. They bent light and shadow into a physical display of calendar mechanics. They built an interface. Let's pull this directly into your life today. Think about the visceral annoyance you feel twice a year when daylight saving time happens. You complain about it, your coworkers complain about it, you feel groggy, your sleep schedule is ruined, and you spend 3 days staring at the clock in your car because you refuse to read the manual to figure out how to change it. It feels like an artificial, modern, corporate annoyance. But it isn't. When you adjust your clock to maximize the daylight, you are doing the exact same thing those Scottish hunter-gatherers were doing at Warren Field 10,000 years ago. You are trying to force your daily routine to align with the shifting light of the sun. The urge to calibrate your life to the light is ancient. Think about the panic you feel when you lose your calendar app or when a massive scheduled event gets deleted from your phone. That sudden, cold sweat that you are going to miss a meeting, miss a flight, or forget a birthday. You feel a deep biological anxiety about missing the window. We treat that anxiety like it is a product of modern capitalism. We blame it on hustle culture or corporate schedules, but that feeling is not new. That exact same spike of cortisol, that exact same terrified urgency, is a biological hangover from the Ice Age. When you feel anxious about being 10 minutes late to a Zoom call, your nervous system is firing the exact same ancient alarm bells that warned your ancestors they were about to miss the caribou migration. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a missed deadline and a missed harvest. It just knows that if you are not synchronized with the rest of the group, you are in immense danger. We look at our Google calendars and our smartwatches, and we think we are so incredibly advanced. We think we have mastered our schedules. But really, we are just performing a high-tech version of carving notches into a baboon bone. You set a push notification to remind you to buy a Mother's Day card. The ancient woman carved a notch to remind her that her body was about to change.
We are still doing the exact same thing. We are desperately trying to project our awareness forward into the future so that we are not caught off guard. We are trying to build a wall against chaos.
And this is where we have to reevaluate the entire concept of the clock.
Today, we view clocks as our oppressors. We hate them. The alarm clock is the enemy that steals our sleep. The punch clock at work is the warden that monitors our labor. We feel like we are constantly running out of time, constantly chasing the minute hand, constantly apologizing for not having enough hours in the day. We feel like time is a cage that modern society built around us to keep us productive. But for 99% of human history, time was not a cage. It was our greatest weapon. If you are an animal, you live purely in the present tense. You react to the predator in front of you. You react to the cold wind blowing right now. You cannot plan for a winter that is 6 months away because you cannot conceptualize 6 months. You are trapped in the absolute immediate now. When our ancient ancestors looked up at the moon and carved that first notch into a bone, they did something no other creature had ever done. They broke out of the present tense. By tracking time, they gained the superpower of anticipation. They could look at a warm, beautiful summer day, feel the hot sun on their skin, and say to each other, "This is nice, but in 90 days, the snow will come. We need to dry meat today." Time was the ultimate survival tool. It allowed humans to outsmart environments that should have killed us. We didn't have thick fur to survive the cold, so we used time to know exactly when to sow the heavy hides. We didn't have the speed to chase down migrating herds, so we used time to know exactly which river valley they would pass through weeks before they arrived. We weaponized the calendar to defeat apex predators, extreme climates, and starvation. When you look at human history, it is incredibly easy to focus on the primitive brutality, The stone tools, the cave bears, the desperate scramble for calories. But underneath all of that dirt and struggle is a species that was quietly, brilliantly mapping the cosmos. The invention of time wasn't just a mathematical breakthrough, it was an emotional one. Think about what it actually means to build a calendar. Think about what it means to spend months digging massive pits in a Scottish field to track the sun. We're spending weeks carving spirals into a cliff face in New Mexico. To track time is to believe in the future. If you believe that the world is completely random, chaotic, and hopeless, you don't build a clock. You just eat what you can, hide in the dark, and hope you survive the night.
But if you track the moon, if you count the days, if you align the stones, you are making a profound, deeply optimistic statement. You are saying that the universe has order. You are saying that the darkness will end, the sun will return, and the spring will come again.
The first calendars were not just tools of survival. They were physical manifestations of human hope. They were our ancestors refusing to be victims of a chaotic world. Every notch on that baboon bone, every pit dug into the earth, every stone aligned with a solstice sunrise, was a prehistoric way of saying, we are going to be here tomorrow, and we are going to be ready. We survived the Ice Age, the predators, and the freezing darkness, not because we were the strongest animals in the forest. We survived because we were the only animals that looked up at the stars and figured out how to read the script of the universe. We survived because we learned to read the sky. So the next time your alarm goes off, before you smash the snooze button, take a second to look at the numbers glowing in the dark. That little screen isn't just waking you up for work. It is the unbroken continuation of a 35,000-year-old human tradition. It is the exact same impulse that kept your distant ancestors alive long enough to make sure you exist today.
We didn't invent time to control our days. We invented time to prove that we had a future. What is a modern habit you do every single day that you suddenly realize is just your brain trying to predict the future? Are you a compulsive weather app checker, or do you overpack your bag for a simple day trip? Let me know in the comments. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.